Welcome to Speechless. We're live from SPNN in St. Paul, Minnesota, just about 3 blocks from where another 260 babies were ripped apart from their mother's womb at Planned Parenthood. And it's interesting to note that Iowa, congratulations Iowa, they just passed and signed into law that abortions are prohibited after a heartbeat is detected in a baby, which is about 17 days. Doesn't take very long. Excuse me, I was wrong on that. 7 weeks. Okay, doesn't take very long. Of course, science tells you life begins at conception. And the spark that takes place when the sperm and the egg meet brings that life together and gets things going. That's all scientific. I mean, science says, if you believe in the scientists. It's so practical theory, theory's out. This is observable science. So life begins at conceptions, but Iowa, the best they can do, which is the most pro-life bill in the United States, is can't have abortions after a heartbeat's detected, or about 7 weeks. So good for them. Now, there's a concept in the Bible called blessings and curses. It's there from the beginning in the Genesis 1, called the Adamic covenant. There's all kinds of covenants, the Mosaic covenant, the New Covenant, all kinds of covenants in the Bible. In those, they name the parties, who's part of the covenant. These covenants are defining the relationships between people. And particularly, these are defining the relationships between God and man. And God is making covenant with man. So one of the issues in dealing with a covenant is blessings and curses. Parties are named, and God says, if you honor our covenant, you keep my ways, we're in good relationship, we're in good law together, okay? And there'll be blessings. You'll have children, property will multiply, your goods, your wealth will be well. If you don't, there'll be curses. You won't be having children. It's just one of the curses that are out there. And of course, that goes to abortion, is the part that every aborted baby is a fulfillment of the curse. And of course, every human is under the curse, because we've all are out of relationship with God. And it's just interesting here to see how are these blessings and curses going to play out in Iowa versus Minnesota? How is God going to treat these two states differently, if he is? So Minnesota, in a sense, is under a curse because we allow this type of things to happen. We're under a curse from God. Our children are dying, and we're doing it to ourselves. It was interesting, this week our pastor had a pro-life message. He couldn't do it he usually does it around the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, but the schedule didn't work, and finally did it this last Saturday. But he brought up an interesting point that I thought was pretty good. Is in law, we have what's called the value of human life. And so if a life is taken or if a life is damaged, there is a financial reward. And so there's an economic value that's placed on life. And they basically say that the quality, the financial of a full life of a person, the financial value is about $8 to $9 million. over the full life. Now in Minnesota, not in Minnesota, in the United States, about 60 million abortions. So did the math on that, and that's 4.8 quadrillion. That's a lot of money that's taken out of our system who we kill. Again, there's that prosperity aspect in the blessings and curses. You kill your offspring, you're financially hurting your state, your country, your family, because there is that economic and that human life value there. A couple other things. Abortion's not a right. Okay, nowhere is it a right. Okay, some guys say it is. Didn't get voted in. Wasn't done by the people, not in our Constitution. Abortion's just not a right. I don't care what somebody says. It's not a right to go out and kill another human being. Another interesting aspect that you keep in mind, pregnancy is not a sin. Being pregnant is not a sin. You can have maybe, you can have your adultery, your sexual act, that could have been a sin, but pregnancy is not a sin. So, and some people literally think that you can go out and because you're pregnant, you're in sin. Well, no. And therefore, let's get rid of this problem I have through abortion and people won't know that I've sinned. Well, it just doesn't work that way, God knows, but then He's a forgiving God for those that repent and change their ways. So life should be a protected gift. We're to rescue the needy, those that are being led to the slaughter, and people of faith need to stand up against abortion. And what won't work is talking about it. What works is you got to be at certain places at certain times. You got to be at your precinct caucus. You got to be voting. You got to be calling your representatives. You got to be organizing the people that you're associated with to do something about it, to protest, and everybody plays a little bit of a role in this deal. But it takes more than just saying you're pro-life. Okay, if you don't go to the places where you need to be at the right time, it's not going to get done. So when the March for Life rally comes around January 22nd, be there. Okay, and encourage your pastors and your spiritual leaders to encourage your church to get down to the rally. Okay, there's 90% of your church. That's my challenge to you if you're a person of faith watching this. You challenge your pastors to get 90% of your church down to that Capitol on January 22nd. Could it be a hardship? Yes, it can. But it's far worse for the baby, and it's far worse for our state, and it's far worse for our nation than a little bit of hardship. Take 2 hours out of your day and go down there and be engaged. Okay, maybe it's 3 hours that it will take. And maybe you got to come in from out of state. All right, so what? You know what? A little bit of hardship, you're there, but we need a lot of people. 5,000 ain't going to do it. We need 100, 200,000 people down there. That will send a message. But there's no vision in our churches. There's no vision from our pastors. And that's why our people are perishing. That's why they don't even get a chance to be born, because there's no vision. And most pastors are ignorant of the process. And the ones that there's even pastors in the Minnesota House and Senate. But are they telling their pastors of how to engage the process to make it work? No, not really. So, yeah, big news in Iowa, sad news for Minnesota. Think of school districts, St. Paul school districts. Think of and Dayton's big thing going on right now. We need $135 million because our schools are in financial crisis. Well, why are they in financial crisis? Bad management. Why are they in bad management? Because they expected their population of the school to be at a certain level so that they would get the funding from the state, but the schools weren't having the students come there. One, because of the indoctrination that's going on in the schools and the anti-constitutional teaching, the Marxist teaching that's going on. Look at what's happening in Edina. You know, if a teacher says, hey, Marxist dribbles coming out through our administration, the administration or somebody on the school board said that. The rest of the school board is looking to censure or kick her off the school board, which they can't do because you have free speech rights, but because they don't like what she says, they're going to violate the right of the people to have their elected people in office. So a big deal going on in Edina, but why teachers are pro-choice and promote that, especially in St. Paul and Minneapolis, my goodness, you're cutting your job. You're cutting the future potential for your own income because you're supporting abortion. An abortion today means there's not going to be a kindergartner in 5 years or a first grader in 6 years, and on and on and on. And there's that economic value going on there. But that's how irrational people get when they want to do wrong, okay? And killing babies is wrong, even though it's legal. So Minnesota pays a high price. Now, I don't know if you saw Keith Ellison out there getting in parades and campaigning and saying, hey, no borders. We got to get rid of these borders here. There shouldn't be any borders. Well, by definition, he needs to resign from office because he says he's representing people within a jurisdictional boundary of the 5th Congressional District, which is, you know, Minneapolis, part of Hennepin County. So, wait a second. He should leave office because his jurisdiction does not, in his mind, does not exist anymore. He's not an officially elected person of his jurisdiction because his jurisdiction doesn't exist in his mind. There shouldn't be these borders. So if he was an honest person, he would resign and then have an election to see if worldwide to see if he got elected for whatever position, to have the world elect him for this jurisdiction instead of the people in his area. I mean, that's just silly thinking that Keith Ellison is doing. So, borderless, does he lock his door? Does he lock his car doors? You know, does he, I mean, what kind of boundaries does he set? Maybe he doesn't set any boundaries. Does he have security guards? I bet he does. He's got some kind of guards going on, but that's a border, a form of a border. So anyway, that's just interesting. I can't believe he's doing that. It's just, I mean, 5th Congressional District, man, you can do better. There's a lot better, and if you're looking for a black man, there's a lot better black man in your area that could do better. Now, Keith Ellison is also a Muslim who swore on the Quran in elected office as Thomas Jefferson, which the Quran is totally against the U.S. Constitution. The Quran is for a one world government and a theocracy, and it's a political system tied in with a religious system, and they're out there to kill the enemy and to behead the enemy. So Keith Ellison is tied in with all of that. So Thomas Jefferson may have had a Quran, but it was to know the enemy, not to study Islam so that he can be part of it or that it's an accepted religion. No. The United States was at war back in that time with Muslims. The religion of peace has had about a war just about every year since its beginning, 1,400 years of war and beheading people. And that's what Muhammad called for. So I always ask this question, what would Muhammad do? And find out your answers as to what Muhammad would do. Google it. What would Muhammad do? And you're going to find out it's not sitting good for those that don't follow Muhammad in this life. Okay. Some other issues relating to national news, which is I think is really fascinating. You know how Mike Flynn, you know, all the news people are saying Mike Flynn's guilty of treason, and he was helping out the Russians, and he was conspiring with the Russians in the election and colluding. Now you have John Kerry going out to Iran, an enemy of the United States, and going out and saying, trying to undercut the executive branch's deals with Iran and how Trump is trying to deal with Iran. And, you know, no outcry from the Democrats that he's violating the Logan Act or whatever act he's violating, or he may be committing treason. You know, I don't care that John Kerry goes out there and tries to undermine President Trump. That just shows you who John Kerry is, okay? And that he is not in favor of the U.S. Constitution, not in favor of our laws, and that he really wants to see a United States that is run by the government instead of by the people. And so it's just the colors, his true colors come out. And it's fascinating. I mean, he's doing everything to save this deal, but here's now there's reports out there saying that Iran never signed the agreement. First of all, it was not a treaty. We gave billions of dollars to Iran, and it wasn't a treaty. And so the executive branch did this on their own, and some Republican senators, you know, also shystered, along with the Democrat senators, shystered the American people and voted to approve the spending, but it was not a treaty, and because a treaty would have never passed. So they went through the back door, no lawsuits were filed, and it's too bad. And you, as an American citizen, are paying to have Iran destabilize the areas around them, continue their wars, fund their wars, and even continue to verbally, at least verbally, attack the United States, and to plan to attack the United States or Israel. And you're paying for that. Okay, so, I mean, that right there should be enough for treason, because Iran wants you destroyed. And of course, Iran today gets up in Parliament and burdens the American flag. You know, and we look how much money we gave them. You know, and again, what did we get in return? Well, who knows? Nobody said what we got in return. Oh, they're not building nuclear weapons. We give them all that money so they don't build nuclear weapons. You know, and when Trump says, you build your nuclear weapon, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Okay? I mean, there's a less expensive way than to give $150 billion to Iran. You just go out there and bomb their nuclear facilities if you don't want them to build. So this, the great negotiator, Donald Trump, is doing a great job keeping our country safe and doing a great job trying to push our Constitution to other countries. Push in the sense saying, it is worth it. It is worth doing this. It is worth having these freedoms of speech, religion, press. It's worth having it because you'll be a better country, you'll be more prosperous, you'll have more justice than you would if you didn't have it. Okay, like North Korea. And now, you know, this North Korea deal, you know, it may be good, it may not, we don't know yet, but positive signs are coming away. But if you get North Korea for having its people go back and forth from country to country, is North Korea going to have freedom of religion? Are they going to have freedom of speech? Are they going to have freedom of the press? You know, is the United States pushing for North Korea to establish a similar type constitution which guarantees the rights of the people as coming from God versus coming from man? Because if North Korea says, well, North Korea gives you these rights, well, North Korea can take them away. Or if they say Kim Jong-un gives you these rights, Kim Jong-un can take them away. And so hopefully that's the focus of Trump's policy, is to go from a socialist, communist form of government to a government by the people, for the people, which guarantees these liberties. So that's the direction it should head. And that's what our foreign intervention should be doing is, hey, set up a justice system, set up these rights, set up a system where people will enforce these liberties. Of course, we have a hard enough time here in the United States making sure that these liberties are upheld. And I bring that into effect because on a past show, we played a clip where they were talking about cameras in the courtroom. And we're going to play this clip here with Representative Considine. I think it was number 35, I'm not sure, but it's the first clip we got there. He made this comment, okay, which I just thought was outrageous because it was being arrogant. But then, you know what I did? I said, okay, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go sit in the back of the room. Let's hear what he says, and then we'll follow up.
And please don't respond. If somebody wants to see how well our district courts work, they can simply drive down and sit in the back. This is reality TV, and that's all it is. Thank you.
All right, so I went last Wednesday down to sit in the back of a courtroom hearing. Guess what? Judge wouldn't let anybody in. So Representative Considine, now what? Are you going to stand up? Okay, now Considine, why weren't you there? You weren't there because you couldn't be there. Okay, now are you going to take my word for it that I was not allowed in that courtroom? That he says you can go there and watch? Or are you just going to say, well, it's he said versus she said? So this was talking about cameras in the courtroom. I just went there to watch. But now, Mr. Considine, Representative Considine, you're not going to be able to see that there was a hearing or not. You're not going to know the details of the hearing, and neither am I, because they closed the hearing. And they had no right to close it, but it happened. So what are you going to do? You know, why don't we put cameras in that courtroom so the judge can't close it? I mean, this is how these representatives, they think they know what's going on and they don't know. And Mr. Representative Considine has this attitude, please don't respond. Well, there needed to be a response. And this is my response to Representative Considine. You can't even do what you've told people to do. It's not allowed. A judge can shut it just because they want to. And there's no recourse. You know why there's no recourse, Representative Considine? Because you're an arrogant man and you won't do anything about it. And you'll just say, too bad. Because that's the form of government you want. You want the secret courtrooms. You want closed courtrooms so you can't see what happened. All right, let's go to the next video. Here's what Hal Davis has to say about whether there should be cameras in the courtroom in relationship to victims.
In some cases, crime victims welcomed camera coverage. A man in LeSueur County, whose wife plotted to kill him, agreed to be photographed and videotaped as he read his victim impact statement. He wanted people to know what he and his daughter endured. Minkoji believes it's time to let the people see what goes on in the people's courtrooms.
Now, in my opinion, it doesn't matter what a victim believes. What if he said, I don't want it? Well, you know, you as people, because you're paying for these courts, you're paying for this justice, you have a right to see what's going on. And the cameras are so inobtrusive. They're so non-there that it just doesn't affect anything. Now, they can be obtrusive, but they don't have to be. And once that case gets going, people are arguing their case. They don't pay any attention to the camera. But it shouldn't matter what the crime victim thinks, but most crime victims want to be on the record. However, you can't even get into the courtroom and watch it without a camera. And when I asked the clerk of court, I said, hey, I'm press. This is an open courtroom, isn't it? Well, you got a good point there. Goes back, talk to the referee. No, you can't come in the courtroom. Go talk to media services. I said, what does media services have to do with this? I'm not filming, I'm just sitting here watching the court case. It's bad, really bad. Okay, all right, we got a clip here, and I bring this, we've had, this is about election fraud in Minnesota, okay, and I'm going to show this video clip. We've already showed it in the past, but I'm going to show it again, and there's a reason we're showing it again. And that is because we've learned a lot more since this has happened. I mean, we already knew a lot of this, but a lot more has happened since this video clip. This was in the government operations hearing, and it was about voter registration system. And Representative Dwayne Quam was asking questions, and he was getting answers, and we're just gonna, it's about 8 minutes, but it's worth the watch, and I'm gonna make comments on the other side, so let's go watch this.
I don't have any member questions at this point, but Representative Quam, others if you're interested.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Meyerhoff. Looking through the report, I didn't see, as part of HAVA in 303, there's a verification process, and that if you don't, for new registrants, and if you don't have a valid driver's license ID number, that then you would utilize the Social Security Administration has a link on their website, and the vast majority of states utilize the last four digits of the Social Security number along with the name, date of birth, and the other pertinent data to do a verification. During the year 2016, there were just under 160,000 verifications run through that site, and over 10% of those came back as being mismatched. I'm not seeing in here details of how many of those over 16,000 mismatches were actually eligible or found to be ineligible.
Ms. Meyerhoff, do you have any insight for us on that, or Ms. Randall?
Mr. Chair and Representative Quam, I do not. I'm not familiar with that section of HAVA, so I don't know if someone from the Secretary of State's office would be able to.
Representative Quam, follow.
Mr. Chair, it's not inconsequential that there were, and this is used by states. It's a national setup. It's made to comply with HAVA. In fact, they even call it Help America Vote Verification. And the Social Security Administration, has a fairly extensive database. And it's not just if things don't match, it also flags if there are people that are deceased and other things. And it's a, backup to the integrity of the system. And I also, on that site, you can check weekly reports, and that election week of 2016, over 12.5% that were submitted were mismatched. And the week after, which I would think would probably include some of the same-day registrants, there are 16 states that have same-day registration. And so there's quite a bit of utilization probably after the fact. And the week after, 30% of those that were put in for verification failed. And so I assume that since the report was on voter registration, that the auditors would have checked, this federally required and actually, implementable and accessible that states across the nation are utilizing, and especially if we're, as a state, using it for, in that calendar year, about 160,000 new voter registrations, and that over 16,000 came up as being mismatched. I would have thought that would have been a very appropriate component of the audit. So the auditors aren't familiar and didn't verify, and this wasn't part of any of the audit activity, this verification of voter registration. Is that what or is there somebody else within the auditors group that may be able to answer whether they actually did thoroughly and verify this?
Representative Quam, if I understand what your inquiry is, you're wanting to know if that system was within the scope of this particular assignment that the legislature gave to the...
Mr. Chair, no, because this was on voter registration, and in the discussion, in the report, they touched on verification of voters, both existing, whether they were challenged, they moved, so verification of the voter registration system, and this is a non-trivial component that is required. It's set up in HAVA, and the federal government has this site which states are utilizing. So I'm
Representative
trying to
Quam,
understand
before you
if
interrupted
that
me
was
when I was
included.
making my statement, I'm going to interrupt you, and let's just ask the auditors instead of you and I discussing something that neither one of us has firsthand knowledge of. Ms. Meyerhoff, I know that a similar or same question was asked, and I'll ask you to respond once again if you would like to. You've heard some of the interchange between Representative Quam and myself.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I've been trying to look in our report to see if there's anything that even sort of touches on the question that Representative Quam has raised. And while we did talk about the verification process, we didn't break out the number of like election day registrants and whether they were verified or not. What I might direct your attention to, although I don't think this directly answers Representative Quam's question, is in Appendix B of the report, which would be page 83. We had asked the Secretary of State's office for the status of all of the voter records in the statewide voter registration system in August 2017. And that
Ms.
indicates...
Meyerhoff, page 83, I don't know if we necessarily have in the report at page 83, we have some letters that are in the back, I think
It's
that.
about 5 pages from the back. I just. have
It
to
would
find
be
it.
83. There's no number on it. It's the Appendix B.
Very good. Thank
Sorry
you.
about that confusion. And so if someone doesn't pass verification through the processes that the statewide voter registration system uses, they would be challenged. And we have the challenged reasons listed here as of August 2017, which is after the 2016 election. And challenged for unverifiable would be in that other category, 4,856, but there are other challenge reasons in there. That's where they would be.
Thank you. Representative Quam, follow up?
Yes, Mr. Chair. When I looked at this over the, past week since this was available, I noticed that if we did use that 48, just under 4,900, there's no way that over 16,000 mismatch would fit in a smaller number than 16,000. So that's where I thought that maybe this had not made it into this report. And that's why I'm trying to understand, you're summarizing, you're grouping things data-wise here and there. But, again, if it's over 16,000, that's a pretty good-sized chunk of, I know a lot of people statewide don't mind having that kind of a margin or better. And we've had races that were closer. And that's why I bring it up is it stuck out as there's something missing in the story. And I wanted, to find out if it was missing because they weren't aware of and didn't have that information from the Secretary of State's when they did the audit, or if it was classified somewhere else. And apparently, I don't think the auditors happened to have picked up on this.
I don't think the auditors happened to pick up on this. Joint Quam, Representative Quam was being so nice. He's just stating the obvious nicely and in a gentle way, saying, this report is flawed. Matter of fact, this is a bad report because it doesn't give us really, there's good information in there, but we're hiding how bad that good information is. 17,000 people, we don't know who voted. We don't know who they're at. 4,826 that came back as being challenged. In other words, who voted for these? They shouldn't have been able to vote. We don't know who they are. Another 17,000 that, they're not challenged, but where's their, they said they lived at a certain address, but we send them a card in the mail, and the card comes back, nobody here at this address by that name. 17,000 of them. 612 felons that voted. That came back. That's enough to win a difference for a statewide election, to change the results. 17,000 that they don't know where they live. And then 4,800 that comes back challenged, meaning, boy, if they show up again, we got to check them over again. And then another 16,000 that Social Security, through the federal laws, Social Security has to help out in voter integrity. And guess what? Oh, we don't know about it. Yet it was in the report HAVA, about HAVA, Help America Vote Again. And it was in the report. They talked about the Social Security. It was there, but during this hearing, they had no recollection of it. So, you know, how knowledgeable are these people? Are they really able to do a legislative audit on voter registration system? I don't know that they can. I mean, there was some good information, but how accurate is it? We got a big problem going on here in Minnesota. And now Representative O'Driscoll, who is kind of beating up his own person, party member, said, well, this is just the beginning. We'll have more hearings on this. Well, you got voter fraud at a significant level. You got tens of thousands of people voting that aren't supposed to be voting. You have no idea who they are. And, oh, we'll have other hearings. But you didn't put it together any legislation to put on Governor Dayton's desk and make him make a decision. You could have very easily said, you know what? We got provisional ballots. You could have wrote that in the law. It would have passed the House. It would have passed the Senate. It would have been on Dayton's desk, and he could have vetoed it to show the type of person he is, that he doesn't care about election integrity. But Representative Chair O'Driscoll, you did nothing, and you're doing nothing, and you're covering this up, and you need to stop it. So the question was asked by Dwayne Quam at the beginning, HAVA verification with Social Security Administration. And in Minnesota, it came back 16,000 people, about 10%, were mischaracterized, where the data didn't match up. People who said, hey, I'm voting, here's my Social Security number, the data didn't match, the Social Security number didn't match. 16,000. And that was not part of this report, although they mentioned that Social Security Administration has a play in the report. These two ladies that were testifying before the House in Minnesota didn't remember it. Okay. Now, what's interesting to know, just so you know, that there is a Freedom of Information request in the federal government, in the Social Security Administration, that was put together by Judicial Watch and Minnesota Voters Alliance with getting this information from Social Security, matching these records. And Social Security Administration has 20 days to get out the report. Excuse me. Social Security Administration said, well, we're going to take 30 days. You know, so the report was supposed to be done on May 7th. Social Security said, well, we'll have it done on May 17th. Okay, by law, they have to do 20 days. They're going for 30. Okay, on their own, self-declared. We get to do it, and we're adding 10 more days, violating the law there. Okay, got an itchy throat going on. So, Minnesota Voters Alliance, protecting the integrity of our voting system by bringing these things to attention to our legislators and to the federal government, that something drastic and something bad is going on in Minnesota regarding our elections. And there's a lot of people voting that shouldn't be voting. All right. I thought it was really disingenuous of Representative O'Driscoll, the chair there, to say neither of us have any insight on this. No, Dwayne Quam had a lot of insight, and he was being nice in the way he was asking the questions. Okay, so I admit O'Driscoll, well, you know what, O'Driscoll has insight too. but he's trying to cover up what's really going on in our election system. Secretary of State's office didn't have an answer to that, but they knew the answer. They know the answer. And Minnesota Voters Alliance has been trying to get information from the Secretary of State's office, and I didn't play the clip, but the Secretary of State in this hearing and in response to a prior lawsuit from Minnesota Voters Alliance that will be having a hearing in May 25th before Judge Frisch, Secretary of State says, I can give out the voting data to whoever I want. Okay? I don't have to give it out. I can give it out to whoever I want in whatever group I want. Okay? So he can give, see, when you ask for voting registration information, let's say you're a candidate, you go down to the Secretary of State's office and says, give me the list of people who voted. And they have to give it to you. But it's only for the last 4 years. Well, how about those people that are registered to vote but haven't voted in the last 4 years? Can I have that information? The answer is no. Well, the answer is some people get it and some people don't. That's the Secretary of State's answer. Okay, and that's not right. And of course, during the first phase of the lawsuit, there's always a motion to dismiss. So Minnesota Voters Alliance said, hey, we want this information, we're suing you for it. The the Secretary of State's office comes back and says, well, you know what, this motion to dismiss, this lawsuit doesn't merit any legal weight, so let's just motion to dismiss, judge, just toss this one out. Well, it didn't work. Judge Frisch says, no, there's some issues going on here. I'm going to set this for trial. Motion to dismiss is denied. So that trial is coming up May 25th in Ramsey County at 1:30. And it's going to be a very important hearing, and it may force the Secretary of State to give over the voter data of those people who haven't voted but are still in the system. Okay, and this is a way to see if there's any type of voting fraud going on. It's also a way to match up people who voted who are felons. It's a good checks and balance on the system to get this public data, and Steve Simon is hiding this data so that people can't see the fraud. Remember, Steve Simon used to go out to the public and say, hey, we got no voter fraud in Minnesota. Nobody's been convicted. Okay? He was saying that. Well, now he's saying in the hearing, 12 felons have been convicted. That's all. That's nothing. Well, 612 voted, but if you're a felon and you voted, you have to have knowledge that you were violating the law. And if you just go there and say, hey, I didn't know I was violating the law, then you don't get charged. Okay, you may get charged, but you won't get convicted because you have to know you were voting when you shouldn't have been able to vote. So 612 felons voted. Well, that's voting fraud. 612 cases, not 12 convictions. Not knowing you weren't supposed to vote as a felon is still voter fraud. Okay? The convictions doesn't matter whether the fraud happened or not. Let's say, because this is prosecutorial discretion, that the prosecutors just decided not to prosecute any of these. So there's no conviction. So Simon can say there's still no voter fraud when there's 612 felons that committed fraud by voting. They're voting when they constitutionally weren't allowed to vote. You know, and we still have 17,000 unaccounted for voters. That's voter fraud too. So it's huge in Minnesota, and Steve Simon wants to play it off as not being huge. Well, that's not the case. Okay. And the other thing that's going on with this voter fraud is the mention of this utilization after the fact. In other words, we're getting data after the fact. Okay, so we find out the voter fraud is after the fact and we can't do anything about it because we didn't before the fact. That's where provisional ballots, this is what you need to be telling your representatives. Put in a provisional ballot system. It's real easy. Oh, you're registering today, provisional ballot. We don't send you through the normal systems that you have to go through, so provisional ballot. Oh, you say you're a felon? No, you're not sure whether you're a felon or not, but want to vote? Okay, we'll let you vote. Here's a provisional ballot. We'll check it out, and we'll know whether you can vote or not. So there's all kinds of ways to do this. The provisional ballot stops everything. So when the auditors are saying the utilization of this information after the fact, it doesn't do any good. The fraud's been committed, the votes have been committed, the people have been elected to office. Okay. Now, when Representative Quam was asking his questions, and this was a legislative audit. How's it going? What's taking place? This was not an investigation. Representative O'Driscoll should be doing an investigation like the U.S. House and the Senate is doing for the Russian collusion scenario. The Minnesota House and Senate has the ability to investigate any part of the government in Minnesota. They get to do that. They need to have an investigation. And they need to investigate Steve Simon. They need to investigate the voting systems. They need to do their own investigation, just like the House. They need to have an interrogation. They need to get the Secretary of State in there, ask him the hard questions. Unfortunately, the Republican Party has wasted this opportunity in Minnesota this year. Unless they decide to do something in the off season. I mean, there's so many areas they can investigate, like the courtrooms, what judges are doing in the courtrooms, how they're making decisions. They got tons of complaints going in there. Spend some time investigating these complaints. And to see a representative or a senator go, oh, when I ask them, are you getting copies from the board on judicial standards as to the complaints that are coming in? And why aren't you getting those copies? You get to investigate. You get to get copies of those. Why aren't you getting those? Oh, didn't think of that. That's what needs to happen. There needs to be investigations. Now, Representative Driscoll says, neither one of us has firsthand knowledge of the questions Dwayne Quam was asking. Well, yeah, that's why Dwayne Quam was asking the question. He knows the answer. He knows the answer. Yeah, he knows the answer. So there's no, this is the way O'Driscoll was handling this meeting. He's demeaning Quam all the way through it. He just, I don't know why he was having this attitude. So there is a verification process. There is a way to verify, and it's not being utilized, and it's not being used. So instead, the people have to go out and spend their own money and sue. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And Steve Simon, unfortunately, is going to be shown as to be an embarrassment to the Republican form of government in Minnesota and to democracy because he's covering up and is covering up as hard as he can as the voting fraud going on in Minnesota. So, challenge voters is unrefutable 4,826 versus the 16,000 others that we don't even know about. That numbers don't match up. Social Security says, hey, there's more people not there. So anyway, huge fraud in Minnesota. 17,000 voters unaccounted for, 612 felons, another 16,000 from Social Security where the numbers didn't match up. But in Minnesota, we think they match up, according to the Secretary of State. There's a lot going on here, and a lot's going to be exposed. So just want to remind you, let's see. So May 25th is that hearing. Later on in May, Eric Lee from Judicial Watch, who's part of these FOIA requests and lawsuits and knows a lot about the investigation into Trump and the Department of Justice and the crimes going on. He will be in town. I'll be having an interview with him. Hopefully we'll be doing a show with him. So it's big news going on in Minnesota, and eventually it should be national news as to what's taking place as far as the voting fraud. Hopefully this could be corrected before the next election. Secretary of State is going to fight it the whole way. Hopefully we will have an expedited process through the courts. Hopefully the judge in Ramsey County will not take the 90 days that she can take to answer this question, but will answer it soon. And of course it's going to have to go through the appeal process, and hopefully it can be expedited. Well, that's all we have for tonight, folks, and thanks for watching. Remember, if you don't stand up for other people's liberties, who's going to stand up for yours? And good men don't do nothing. God bless. Have a great week.
The days go by like the forest sets on fire, and the wind takes the kite as the firefly brings the light.